And a lot of people struggle with perfectionist thinking and the kind of not enough-ism thinking or the shoulds. I should get more done. I should be more productive. I should be here by now in my career. And that's not helpful. That internal kind of mental beatdown over time can really damage our mental health.
Hey everyone, let's start healing. I'm Adrienne Murchison and welcome to episode 115 of the Let's Start Healing podcast. We have more in common than we think, and what we have in common can change the world. Well, I think you are going to really enjoy this conversation today. It's a very important conversation with psychologist Dr. Karen Dahl. And we are talking about mental health and in the workplace and the idea of spirituality in the workplace. Dr. Karen Dahl is the author of the book, Building Psychological Fitness, How High Performers Achieve with Ease. And as I said, it is a really, really important conversation. How many of you who work in a corporation or for a company find that your mental health and well-being is lacking? I think from time to time, we have all felt that way. And our well-being is so important, not only for us personally, but for our productivity, obviously. But that's where we spend much of our life if we work outside of our own business. We spend much of our time in a workplace, and that is quality time out of our life. And so it's important for us to be in a good state of mental health. And when I decided personally that I was going to make my mental health and well-being a priority in my work, I felt a lot better. I had a much greater amount of peace of mind. Dr. Karen Dahl talks with me about the importance of mental health in the workplace and what she has found in talking with her clients as a coach and bringing her skills and knowledge as a psychologist to her sessions with her clients. I think that there are just some simple things that we can do that we don't do around spirituality and mental health in the workplace. And when I say spirituality, I mean, so many of us are from different backgrounds, different faiths. So I'm not talking about prayer, although I love prayer. I don't know if I would want to, well, I don't know. I don't know that I would want to have a formal prayer in the workplace because it just has so much around it. Although I personally say a prayer even before I walk into the building that I work at. And I work remotely most of the time, but before I engage with someone regarding my work of any kind, I try to say a prayer of intention and well-being for everyone. And I think that before we have meetings, uh, especially before we have meetings, maybe a statement of affirmation about what the intention is can be helpful, because I have been in meetings where I felt like, what are we here for? And what are we talking about? What is the point and the intention? Now, that's not all of the meetings that I attend, but I'm just saying over the years, I have been in meetings and that has run through my mind. And I think that because of spiritual groups that I've been a part of, I've just learned to do that. I've learned to bring to mind what is the thing for. And that can be to the benefit of everybody involved. What is the thing for? If I'm going to have a conversation with a colleague or my boss, what is the thing for? What is the conversation for? What does that person need? What do I need? And that's not always a successful outcome, but I think that even approaching our work and our engagement with other people in the workplace is with good intentions, meaningful intentions, sincere, genuine intentions can help with our mental health. And one of the things I enjoyed the whole conversation with Karen Dahl, but one of the things that I really found interesting was when she was talking about how men feel and women, how everyone feels as they get older in the workplace. But she said something about men that it was very enlightening. So you will hear what she had to say. And I just want to share some statistics that I found before I came to you today. And let me see here. This is from Spill Chat. And actually, the statistics that I found on this side, I found on others as well. The impact poor mental health has on people. Around 1 in 6, that's 14.7%, experience mental health problems in the workplace. Since the pandemic, 81% of workplaces have increased their focus on employee mental health. So obviously, there is a need. However, 1 in 3 employees still feel that mental health support in their workplace is inadequate and would like more support from their employers. How many of us feel that we can be honest? What always runs through my mind is, you can't handle the truth, son. You know, Jack Nicholson. All right. So nearly half, 48% of employees say their mental well being declined in 2022. And 28% said they are miserable in their workplace. 60% of employees also reported feeling emotionally detached at work. Only 13% of employees feel comfortable discussing mental health in the workplace. Happy employees are 13% more productive on average. And this piece of data that I saw elsewhere also says globally around 12 billion working days are lost every year to depression and anxiety. And so I'm like, what does that mean? 12 billion working days? Well, they equate that to 50 million years of work are lost every year to depression and anxiety. Mental health issues cost the global economy around $1 trillion every year. I mean, gosh, we are who we are. We're not robots. None of us are robots. We are who we are. And as Karen says in our conversation, we bring our whole self to work. And something that has always troubled me is it feels like I have felt in the past like I have to shed a part of myself in when I walk through doors, when I walk through corporate doors. I can't show up as me because you can't handle the truth, son. I'm sorry. I know I'm being silly, but that is how we feel, right? We can't be our complete self in an appropriate way. You understand what I'm saying? Well, let's get to this conversation. Let's meet Dr. Karen Dahl. And before we meet her, let me add that in previous episodes this summer, I talked with women somewhat about aging in the workplace. So I will put some of those links in the notes for this episode. So once again, let's get started. Let's meet Dr. Karen Dahl and let's start healing. Welcome, Karen.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. I was just telling you your work is very important to me. I love talking about mental health in the workplace. And your book, is this your latest book, Building Psychological Fitness, How High Performers Achieve with Ease? Is that your latest book?
It is. It's my latest book and it's my only book.
And did you write this book based on your work with your clients, or what made you write the book? And could you share a little bit about it?
Sure. Yes, of course. So I published it. It's almost 1 year in September, actually. And I published the book really to try and make some mental health awareness and mental health practices and interventions to be a bit more accessible to people.
Mm-hmm.
And really, it just came from this energy that I had at the beginning of COVID. I was having coaching sessions with people and hearing so much about the struggle and how people were struggling and feeling isolated. And probably most importantly, feeling like they're the only one that is struggling. And so I was thinking, I have conversations like this with people all day, every day, but they're not having conversations enough with each other. And so what ends up happening is too many people are suffering in silence. We have a shortage of mental health providers and clinicians. And so I just saw this as a way to provide really what it is a resource book. For people that may or may not need therapy or may want to supplement therapy or may want to try some of their own self-regulation practices to help have some agency in managing their own mental health.
And so are there tools in the book for when a person is under stress? What are some of the information they'll find?
Yes, all kinds of tools. There's a little bit of, there's a lot of research in the book, but I did try to make it very practical and to try to use understandable terms that are relatable to everybody. And so there's a little bit of foundational work of, okay, what are people struggling with in terms of mental health and well-being these days, post-pandemic, understanding like what are some obstacles that get in the way of thriving and flourishing, and then what we can do to address those. So we cover a lot of interventions and practices that are what we would say inside out practices. So those could be top down, managing our thinking, upgrading our mindsets, cognitive reframing, things like that, upgrading our thinking patterns essentially, and bottom up strategies. So that might be something more related to the body, the mind-body connection, and how do we manage our breathing and manage our stress response, our nervous system to help us rest, recover, and replenish. And then I also talk a little bit about outside-in practices to manage our mental health, and those would be more community-based and connection-based.
Yeah. And so what are some obstacles that can get in the way if a person is under stress at work?
Yes, I have a whole chapter on that. So let's say there could be external obstacles. So excessive workloads, excessive work demands, life stressors,
right?
Global pandemics, loneliness epidemics, external adversity and situations that people find themselves in just with the stress of life. Mm-hmm. And then internal obstacles. So what gets in the way, it sometimes is how our relationship with stress can get in the way. How we think about our stress, how we think in general, thinking traps can get in the way. So some of it is just doing some exploration and taking inventory of, what are some of my internal self-regulation? How am I managing my thoughts? How am I managing my emotions in a way that's healthy? I work with a lot of high achievers, which is how I kind of got the name for my subtitle. And a lot of people struggle with perfectionist thinking and the kind of not enough-ism thinking or the shoulds. I should get more done. I should be more productive. I should be here by now in my career. And that's not helpful. That internal kind of mental beatdown over time can really damage our mental health.
Yeah. And I wonder how big time is, because I remember in 2020, I was stressing out about no time. And I work remotely. I was working remotely from the time that the pandemic started. And I would
Yeah.
be in my pajamas. Well, basically, that's not true because I would have to take my dog out. But I would be in sweats, basically. I would not have bathed or anything until maybe 7 p.m. And I was talking to another friend who was a coach, and she was saying that a lot of her clients were having the same issue. No matter what they planned, how determined they would be, that they would step away and take a break. And it was just so hard for a full year, more than a full year. Was that something common that you were finding, time management and just feeling overwhelmed?
Oh, absolutely. And the whole idea of soft clothes, maybe not our pajamas, but living in soft clothes, I've just kind
Yeah.
of kicked that habit after 3.5 years of it.
Yeah.
The drift when we're working from home, it's very easy to drift back into the computer, drift back into work, and not have clear boundaries. The words that I would hear the most, frankly, I still do, are struggle. I'm struggling, overwhelmed, and exhausted. So there is a very common sentiment of people just feeling overwhelmed and stretched just a little too thin.
Right, right. Have you found that different workplace environments or companies, are they as sensitive to mental health today as they were, say, in 2020, early 2021?
I think there's a lot more awareness. I think that was, the COVID was a catalyst to have more of these conversations and more dialogue. And I think leaders and organizations care. They want to address this.
Yeah,
And we still haven't cracked the code, though, on
yeah,
how do we best address mental health at work. And there's some research that came out recently, actually, that indicated leaders have a disproportionate estimate of how much better employees are doing than they actually are.
mm,
And so this research has demonstrated basically that leaders think employees are doing better than they really are.
yeah,
So, we still have work to do. There's still stigma. People are afraid to speak up if they need help. They don't want retaliation. They're afraid, what will people think? What if my manager thinks I can't handle this?
yeah.
What if this gets used against me in my performance review? There are still obstacles and things that we need to address in the workplace so that we can get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, and it seems like to me that there would just be an inherent conflict or rub because a company, even though they want to address this, they do have a bottom line and they're performance based, aren't they? I would say. So there's going to
Right.
be just a conflict. Like, what is the happy medium?
Yeah, I think that's the $1 million question. Because, right, their organizations are there to manage the work. And that's one thing that I'm hoping more of this awareness will help us understand, like, how do we find mutually beneficial outcomes here? And managing mental health at work doesn't mean don't do your work.
Right,
It doesn't mean don't be accountable or do whatever you want.
right, right.
It just means how can we set the workplace up and create infrastructures that are sustainable for people and that lend to well-being, because the workplace should be a source of well-being and a source of flourishing. It should be a domain in our lives that we can flourish and thrive. And unfortunately, right now, too many people have a relationship with work that it's distressing.
Yeah, dysfunctional.
Yes, it's distressing and it's compromising their physical and mental health.
Right.
And it shouldn't be mutually exclusive. I think we can set up organizations and companies and structures that promote well-being and mental health and get really great results
Yeah.
and are profitable.
Right. I heard you on another podcast and you were mentioning that a client brought up something that speaks to me so much. And I think your client said something like, is this my workplace self or my personal self? And that
Mhm.
really resonates for me because that is my problem or had been with corporate America for myself. I feel like we're not our authentic selves most of the time when we go into an office and when we were pretty much always in an office. I felt like we put on some kind of a cloak where we're not our natural selves, and then we shed that when we leave, when we walk out the door. And
Mhm.
it's so important to me as a person to be my complete self all the time. And so that
Mhm.
resonated for me when you mentioned a client had made that comment.
Well, and I'm so glad you brought it up because I think there's a misunderstanding sometime about this idea of bringing our whole self to work. Pre-pandemic, I would hear this more. Maybe I shared that on whatever podcast you listened to me on, but people used to say in coaching, "Which self are you talking about?" So my response was and still is, "You're the same self." So
Yes.
our behaviors might be a little bit different at home and at work, as perhaps they should be. But people that resist this idea of your whole self or being authentic, I think it's often coming from a place of fear or misunderstanding what that means. And again, that doesn't mean let me do whatever I want whenever I want.
Yeah.
That's not what it means. It just means I am a whole being and everything about me and my mind body connection in my life will have an impact on my performance.
Mm-hmm.
So why not support people's mental health and well-being? Because then we will have more effective employees.
Right, right. And I mentioned how I had talked to some guests about age in the, well, women in the workplace, but what I didn't say was that I was talking to them, to women, about aging in the workplace and their value. And so I'm wondering what kinds of um, experiences you come up with, you engage with your clients regarding aging in the workplace for women and for men. And what are some of the
Mhm.
themes that you hear from men?
That's really interesting. Well, so a couple things. One is what I do hear is ageism when people are interviewing for jobs and applying for jobs, that people over the age of 50, for example, feel like that can be used against them, which that blows my mind. I mean,
Yeah.
I know it's real. I know that it's happening, but being somebody that's in that season
Yes.
of life, I feel like I'm kind of just getting started. I can't
Exactly.
imagine being discriminated against because of my age.
Right.
And part of that is true. We're living longer and we're working longer. And so now it's considered mid-career is very different than what it was decades ago.
Right.
So that's one thing that I hear, a challenge that I hear when people are out looking for jobs and being in job search mode. And, it's kind of like the microaggressions and the
Yes.
underlying, not explicit things that people experience with age and seasoning. I mean, seasoning I prefer. I suppose
Mm-hmm.
age is a little more direct, but I think that, people are feeling less valued, especially I think in some industries,
Mm-hmm.
where that it has become a little bit more of a trend is to in fact, there was a CEO recently, I believe that was in the news, that came out and said in one of his board meetings that we need younger employees. And I'm sure this individual got shut down pretty quickly because obviously you can't say that. You can't say
Right.
that
Right.
you're
Right.
CEO of a publicly traded company. But what an awful message to send. They're very tenured employees who've been loyal to the organization and have worked there for 30 years.
Right, right. And it just seems to me that it should be obvious that both can help a company to thrive. You know, young workers and more seasoned workers, like you said, can help a company to thrive. And one of the things that I notice about people that I know who are getting older is I have very few people in my orbit who only have one job. Like most people I know, they're professionals and then they have a business that they've started. They're entrepreneurs in addition to working for a corporation. So
Mhm.
all these different skill sets that a person could have aren't always valued.
Well, and this is the future of work. And this is the future of
Yeah.
work. It's gonna look different, and there isn't gonna be one linear path in people's careers. This sort of overlays just with the idea of diversity and inclusion is diverse teams make better teams.
Right.
So when we could be talking about diversity of thought, diversity of geography, diversity of age, diversity of gender. I mean, all of the above. We know that to be true now.
Right. Right.
Yet, I think fear keeps people's mindsets
Hmm.
limited in that area.
Are you hearing anything in particular from men and what they may struggle with in the workplace when it comes to mental health?
Yes, not necessarily about the age dynamics, but certainly what I hear is loneliness.
Really? In
Absolutely.
what way?
I think especially men that are over child rearing age. So men who are parents and females, I think, struggle with this too, but particularly the male clients that I work with. Um, Not everybody has a family, but those who have families, often their social outlets tend to revolve around the kids' activities and school and sports or whatever the kids are involved with. And then when that infrastructure goes away, or that sort of system where you see people at the football game on Friday night, or you see people at a violin concert or the soccer game, when that goes away, then so do the relationships, and not having the same amount of proximity with people. I think some of the men that I work with aren't necessarily as proactive
In
in
finding something else?
finding something else, or maybe finding paths of interaction that are intimate and meaningful.
Hmm.
So I'm sure people can have a really meaningful conversation on the golf course. I'm sure that happens, and that's great. Yet I think for men, there's just a little more courage that's required to be vulnerable and to get beneath the surface and talk about real stuff,
Hmm.
real problems, real struggles, and real challenges. So I would say men over the age of 40 in particular, I think it's a gap in our society and our culture too, because men are conditioned to just be tough and carry on,
And not
uh,
talk about it.
and not talk about the struggle. And that does damage. It's
Yeah.
hard to unravel that.
Wow. Well, let's take a shift for a little bit. And I do want to shift into some spiritual talk. And I want to start with, how did you get into this line of business? Have you been doing this for 20 or 30 years? How did you get into psychology and clinical psychology and the work that you're doing?
Yes. It's sort of a boring story that, I grew up kind of always wanting to be a psychologist. And it's just something I always wanted to do. I've always been fascinated by human dynamics. I've always felt connected to people and very interested in understanding people. And so I went to graduate school right out of college, and my degree is in clinical psychology, but I have always been in workplace mental health, or I've always been a workplace psychologist. I don't know that that's really a thing or a name, but even though I'm a licensed psychologist, I've always dealt with professionals as opposed to being in the therapy realm where I'm dealing with insurance companies and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that being said, I view coaching and leadership development also as having a therapeutic alliance. It just isn't technically therapy per se. So that's kind of how I got into psychology. It just was always an inherent interest. And my career has taken a lot of paths. I mean, I've focused on a lot of subsections and areas, and more recently have been a little more around mental health advocacy
Mm-hmm.
in the last, 3 to 5 years, because before that, people weren't really ready for it. We just weren't quite ready for that conversation to take main stage.
Mental health in the workplace?
Yes.
Really? And
Yeah.
so, mental health advocacy, what does that look like for your
It just
work?
looks like helping organizations and managers and employees and teams understand how to have the conversations around mental health, how to create systems and, again, infrastructures in the workplace that will support and promote mental health. And just looking at what does the research and science tell us about flourishing, and how can we
Mm-hmm.
apply that into the workplace.
Okay.
Work is a space where we spend a lot of time, most of us. A lot of our lives
Exactly.
are channeled towards our work. So again, I just think I think we all deserve to flourish at work,
Yeah.
and it's definitely, there's shared accountability in how we work towards that. So all of us as individuals have a responsibility to manage our own mental health care.
Right.
Managers and leaders are there to create conditions to help people be set up for success. And I think organizations have responsibility to set systems up that will help the promotion of that. I'm not sure that answered your question at all.
It does. It does. But I want to say that I love that you say that we all have a responsibility to manage our mental health. I feel so strongly about that. And for myself, I have tools. One of my major tools, if I'm getting stressed during the day, is to go to something that's going to shift me. So I have a lot of spiritual teachers I'll go to that I like to listen to on YouTube. So I may go to a clip, or I may put on some particular music that I know is going to shift my energy. This is if I don't have a chance to exercise, or I may try to meditate, but sometimes that can be really hard for me to get my head right, to really lower the noise that's going on in my head. So I'll use some of these other tools. And I think that it's important that we figure out what our tools are or what works for us, so we can go to these things when we are stressed out.
Oh, absolutely. And we all have agency in that.
Right.
So these are all tools, practices. They're kind of like ingredients, and not all tools are going to be effective for everybody. There is no one size fits all solution. We know that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the more psychoeducation that we have, the more we can experiment and figure out what works best for us. And the spirituality component, I mean, I haven't spoken to that directly yet, but there's a whole chapter in my book about that, because I see spirituality as being a really important component of well-being and wellness and mental health.
Can you share more about your chapter around that?
Sure. Yes. I present the research about spirituality in general and the elements of transcendence and the importance of like the power of purpose and being connected to something beyond the self, and having that create a sense of meaning, where we're able to get outside of ourselves, because mental suffering often is very self-absorbing. And
Yes.
anything that we can do to get outside and connect to something bigger than us, I think can help create some healthy detachment. So there's a lot of research about spiritual practices that help people get through, and also doing it in community
Mm-hmm.
shows that it can have a compound impact. So I talk in the book about the research around um, using spirituality as a way to enhance mental health, and then also religion.
Yes.
So religion and spirituality, of course, they intersect, yet
Mm-hmm.
they also can be separate constructs.
Right.
There's a lot of research around people that are involved in religious communities and how positively that impacts their mental health. And there are a
Right.
number of reasons why we speculate or hypothesize of how come that is. And that's one thing that is also being hypothesized, that we have such a reduction of faith-based communities in our culture right now. And there are some researchers that are correlating that with part of our drop in mental health and well-being.
And you are reminding me of something I wanted to bring up. I was wondering about this with your clients. So, are you noticing now versus, say, 2020, that lifestyles have changed? There were two major things that I did pre-pandemic. I had a spiritual discussion group that I went to every Sunday, which was enormous in my life. And there was a jazz club that I was connected to. I had worked there years ago. It was kind of like my cheers place. So I realized a couple of months ago that I don't have those anymore. I still have the group, my spiritual discussion group, but we do it virtually, which is not the same as doing it in person at all. So it is very much changed. But I realized I don't have those things, and that it's major that they have been removed. And, you know, I think I'm doing very well in terms of incorporating other things, but that's pretty big. And I'm bringing this up because I'm thinking of other people, and I'm wondering about things that have changed in their lives, aspects of their lifestyle that may have changed. And maybe we're not even conscious of it. And then we're walking around with this difference or this ache, and we might not even know what it is.
That is so descriptive, the ache, right? So the ache, it's like the slow fade, where maybe it's not an acute pain point
Yeah.
where we're thinking like we have to stop the bleeding, but that slow fade, I think that's a really good point, and it's not surprising at all. So your spiritual discussion group and the jazz group, those are like multipliers.
Right.
So anytime that we are in company with people, being in sync and doing something or being engaged together has like a quantum impact on our well-being. That is real.
Yeah.
And I believe that we can also establish very intimate connections and meaningful connections virtually.
Right.
There's some new research that has come out that says the most important thing for connection is that we're live and synchronous. So if we
Mm,
can't meet in person, we meet on video. If we
right.
can't meet on video, we talk on the telephone,
Right.
as opposed to asynchronous chatting or instant messaging or all of these channels that have now been developed since COVID, which we've had to find more channels of communication, but that isn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
Having like a synchronous real-time interaction and conversation is really important for connections. And we know that connections with people is the number one predictor of longevity.
Right, right. I was just talking with a friend who saw this documentary I haven't watched yet on Netflix right now. And it's about, I think, people who live over 100 years old. And she was saying that one of the common themes is that they all give back to the community. They believe in service, and
Mhm.
that is been known to prolong your life.
Was it the one about the blue zones?
Yes, yes.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, they've looked at different geographical areas in the world where they have a higher number of people that live over the age of 100, and the power of connection, community, and having impact
Yes.
and being like an active contributor to the community, they believe are some pretty important components.
Wow.
We all want to bring value and have impact and
Exactly.
matter and have our work matter.
Right. And it's undeniable that feeling that we have when we're giving and we're in connection with someone else and we're being of service. That feeling is undeniable.
It's the best. And it's probably being of service in community is probably like the number one fastest, best way to and quickest way to enhance our well-being.
Amazing. Do you consider yourself a spiritual person? I think you're spiritual, and I don't know you before today. Do you consider yourself a spiritual person? Do you have a strong relationship with God? And do you call God God, or some people call God by another term?
Yes. Yes, I would love to talk about this. Yes, I consider myself a spiritual person. I call God God. My faith background is that I'm Christian, and within Christianity, my faith background is that I'm a practicing Catholic.
I grew up Catholic as
Did
well.
you?
Where did you grow up?
Minnesota, where I am now.
Oh,
Mhm,
that's
mhm.
nice. Did you go away to school, or you've been there your whole
Did. I
life?
went Yes, I went away to school. I went to California, went to Santa Clara University for college, and then moved back to Minnesota.
Okay.
Every winter, we ask ourselves, why do we live here? Why do
I
we do
get
that?"
it.
And for some reason, we're surprised every January.
Yeah. I grew up in Buffalo, so I relate. How would you describe your faith and your connection to your faith and your relationship with God?
How would I describe? You know what? I would say in my adult life, I have developed more of like I feel like a friendship and a relationship with Jesus. And that to me is like a very strong source of support. I also I lost my mother 6 years ago, and my faith has been really, I don't know how I could have gotten through that grief without the understanding that I will be connected with her again.
Right.
I
Right.
don't know how I would have gotten through it, had I not had that in my belief system. So for me, that was a very strong source of coping.
Yes. What do you think that God calls you to do in this work that you do, which is so important for yourself and for your clients?
Yes, being of service to others so that they can flourish and thrive in their own lives.
And how does that benefit you? Like, what do you do for yourself when you're doing that important work?
Well, anybody that is in a service-oriented profession, that's something that we always need to be looking at is how am I filling my own tank and not becoming depleted, and how am I setting boundaries? I do my best to practice what I preach, and sometimes I'll even say like, what would my inner coach tell me right now? In understanding how am I managing my own mental health and making sure that I'm attending to the basics, like the basic wellness
Yeah.
habits of getting sleep? And am I drinking enough water? And am I getting enough exercise?
Right.
Those things are easy to do, but they're really easy to not do
Yes,
also.
yes. So true. Well, is there a time when you really feel the presence of God with you?
Yes, I would say I do in church. I do in nature. I do when there's quiet and pause and stillness. My husband and I went to Italy this spring for the first time, and I would say being in those amazing, beautiful old cathedrals and churches to me brought just this overwhelming sense of awe. I mean, it's visually appealing and beautiful, but even just to understand the history behind the development of the church and holy people, I was emotionally overwhelmed being in that space.
Oh, I love it. I felt that too. So I understand. I
Yeah.
understand.
I think pause and stillness, but also just connections, meaningful connections with people. That can be a very kind of transcendent, awe-inspiring
Yes.
experience, which I experience as a spiritual experience.
Is there a time when you've experienced a huge blessing or a miracle that you knew that was completely God and you said, I had nothing to do with this. This was just God.
Oh, yes. I mean, so many, even just sort of mini experiences that kind of cannot be explained in any other
Right,
way.
right.
But I would say the biggest, probably most crucible moment related to that was I was diagnosed with cancer 6 years ago, right before my mom got sick. And I'm fine and my recovery is fine. And we were able, it was early intervention. But the doctor did say to me at one point, had we not discovered this now, you may not have been here in a year. So it was a treatable yet aggressive kind of cancer. And the reason that we ended up even finding it was I was going to visit the doctor for something entirely different. And with this preventative checkup, then we were able to find it. But I would not have gone in had it not been for this other issue that was happening that brought me into the doctor. So for me, that was definitely like this is a God thing. And if I sat down and thought about it, I could probably come up with 100 other
Right,
examples. That
right.
one was particularly, life-saving.
Amazing. I'm so happy that you are doing well. You look wonderful. How was your journey? Did you have to have chemotherapy or how was your treatment, your journey of treatment and getting through that?
They had clear margin. I had surgery, and they had clear margins after the surgery, so we did not do chemo or radiation, and it's been fine 6+ years since then.
That's
So I was
wonderful.
blessed.
Wonderful.
And when you
And
go, anyone who has experienced that, when you go into surgery not knowing, they really can't tell you until they get the cell types back. So you have to go in kind of like automatically expecting the worst.
mhm,
And, you think about all kinds of crazy stuff when you're faced with that kind of experience. But yeah,
yeah.
I think I had 82 stitches in my abdomen.
Oh my goodness. What kind of
Mhm.
pain were you in?
Well,
Physical
leading up
pain.
to it, 0 pain. I had
Right,
0 symptoms.
right.
0 symptoms, and then afterwards, I mean, it was a robotic surgery, so it was actually the recovery was pretty
That
straightforward.
that is a miracle. That
Mhm.
is a miracle how you discovered it
Yeah,
and that's wonderful. That's
I'm
wonderful.
grateful.
Would you consider yourself you are a healer? No question. Would you consider yourself a healer and a seeker or
Can you be both?
I think you can.
I would I feel like both.
I think you can.
I feel like both. I feel like a seeker, you mean in terms of spirituality, seeking in spirituality?
Mhm. Yes.
Yeah, I feel like I will always have some seeking part of me because we don't have those answers, and that's part of the mystery of it. I think that keeps me engaged.
Yes. You
Yes.
asked me, did I mean in spirituality? And I actually mean all encompassing because you are a healer. I tend to think that in totality, we are spiritual beings. You're doing healing work. I don't necessarily separate anything
Yeah,
away from
and you know how
spirituality.
how I think of this idea of healing is what I do. I don't have a cure.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a medicine. I don't have like a magic wand. My clients sure wish I did. I sure wish I did sometimes. But what I am able to do, which I think in and of itself is healing, is just the practice of holding the space with people
I love
and
it.
being there with them in their suffering or their challenge or whatever it is, their turmoil, whatever it is that they're facing. Because as a coach, our jobs are actually not to give advice. I still do sometimes. I can't help myself. But our job is to help people on their own journey kind of look within and introspect and find their own path.
Yeah.
So I guide, I hold the space, but I think what's powerful about it is just this idea of accompaniment. It's
Yes.
like we're all healing together. We
Yeah.
all have to heal from something. And I can't fix it for somebody, but walking that path and being a companion, I think is really powerful. And I think we can apply that into the workplace.
When you
Healing
say
together and accompanying one another in the workplace, I think it applies there too.
healing together and accompanying one another in the workplace as you're trying to reach your goals, is that what you mean?
Yes.
Is it?
Yes, like the healing and the holding the space and having emotional connection, all of that doesn't need to be
Yes.
separate.
I agree. And the holding the
Mhm.
space is so beautiful and to me huge. I love the idea of holding a space because I think, let's say, if someone is ill and there's a lot of concern around their illness, or if someone is missing and there's a lot of fear and concern around will this person be found, I always think it's so important to hold a space for that person to be well, to get well, for that person to return. Because if we
Mm.
don't, then there is no space. All the space is around the worst that could happen. So to
Mhm.
me, it is so important to hold that space, like you said.
I love that. So it's like holding the space creates more space.
Yes, for our well being.
I love that. To me, it's, sometimes people will say, "Well, is it draining, hearing about people's challenges?" Because we don't always talk about challenges, but let's face it, that's generally where we need more help.
Right.
We could talk about how awesome your life is in a coaching conversation, but then it's like, "What do you need me for?"
Right, right.
So we do tend to focus a little more on, challenges and problems. And sometimes people will say, well, does that get draining? And I mean, obviously, if you do anything for too many hours, you feel drained, just
Right.
regardless of what effort or activation it is. But I mean, I'm energized by it and I experience it as really an incredible privilege. I meet people and sometimes they don't know me. If we're
Mm-hmm.
starting a coaching alliance and engagement, and usually we do a quick introduction and then I'll say, okay, tell me about your life. That takes a lot of courage
Right.
and vulnerability to
Right.
show up to a stranger and say, oh, okay, well, here's my current state of affairs. And so it's never lost on me that people don't know me and yet here they are willing to share important stuff with me. So I am so grateful for
Yeah.
it's a privilege.
It must be really so helpful you being a psychologist and a coach because you have so much knowledge and expertise to bring around the situations that people are talking about.
Yes, I'm like a hybrid in that way. And I always offer the disclaimer, when starting a coaching relationship and say, here, just so that you're aware, this is my lens, this is my mental model. I tend to
Right.
bring in psychological principles. So I think when people sign up, so to speak, I think they're aware of that. And
Yeah.
plenty of people are scared off by it, I'm sure.
One last question before I ask you to share how people can get in touch with you. If there is a special gift that is distinct to you, a special superpower that you have, what would you say that it is?
I would say it's what I just described as holding the space.
That's wonderful.
Holding the space and trying to be an upper companion.
An upper companion?
Mhm. A companion to help people move towards thriving and flourishing. If I don't know if you've ever heard that term, like lower companions can bring us down and
Yeah.
upper companions can help us elevate.
Yes.
So that's what I hope.
Wonderful. And if someone is listening or watching this and they want to get in touch and they're interested in your services, are you taking on new clients? Would you be willing to have a consultation with them?
Sure, I
And
love to hear from people. So my
okay.
my website is Dr. Karendoll, DrKarenDoll, and I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn probably the most, so people can find me there. Anyone that's listening, if your teams need some help with having conversations about this stuff or stress management, I would love to hear from you. Every conversation that happens moves us in the right direction.
Right, right. And drkarendoll.com, right, is
Yes.
your website. So you do go into the workplace and you can talk to groups of people about
That's a
their
lot of
their
what I
goals.
do these days. I'll speak
Okay.
at conferences or organizations about psychological fitness or how leaders can create conditions for their employees to thrive. And my book, as you mentioned, I do a lot of speaking about my book, and it's very practical. And I
Yes,
titled it in a way that, again, it would be accessible to everybody because we all have mental health.
right.
We don't all have mental illness, but it's not like we're mentally healthy or not. We all have mental health and we all experience mental health challenges.
We certainly
So,
do.
yes, so for people that get hung up on the language, my hope is that, we can see psychological fitness like we see physical fitness, that it's something that we can train for and we can enhance and we can develop with practice and intention and consistency.
Hmm. And building psychological fitness is available on Amazon and
Yes.
in the bookstores.
Yep. I mean, most bookstores where books are sold, Amazon's probably the easiest.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to
I
talk to you.
appreciate you having me, and I admire these conversations that you're having. It's
Thank
so
you.
important. And I think spirituality in the workplace I think we're going to see a movement there. I think we're going to see
It's
more conversations about talking about that at work.
I love that. That could create a lot of change. Wonderful
Mhm.
change. So I love that. Thank you so much, Karen.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Remember, you can listen to all episodes of Let's Start Healing on traditional platforms: Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and YouTube, among them. Until next time, let's start healing.